from there because there's about 50 different directions you can go. And the latest version belongs to Ohio State. So we will talk some Bo Jackson and then look ahead to other recruiting targets and how the recruiting process is going for Ryan Day and the Buckeyes here on Ohio State Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. Pull up a chair for the next 60 or so while we talk Buckeyes football. And, of course, it's recruiting season. Tony Gerdeman's right next to me. BuckeyeHuddle.com. You can catch his work right there. And, of course, the Buckeye Weekly podcast. That is a must. Steve Hellwagon taking a few minutes away from vacay to join us here on Buckeyes Live. And that's good of Steve to do. And, of course, his work is at Bucknuts 247 Sports. Gentlemen, how we doing today?
Doing well.
Doing great.
Steve, vacation going well?
So far, so good. We are going to be here till maybe Sunday morning and then head back to Ohio after that. It was a long trip, and I'm coming off really red for some reason. I don't know why, but other than I was out in the sun down here a couple days. But yeah, I did use sunscreen, but I'm coming off very much red, it looks like. But so my daughter's doing an internship in Washington, D.C., and we drove there, dropped her off. And she is working with the Corn Refiners Association, and her office is 2 blocks from the White House, which is kind of cool. So she is right in the heart of everything there on Pennsylvania Avenue and wherever she's at there. And then we hopped in the car from there, went to Richmond, Virginia, stayed overnight, and then it was like 7 hours from there to Hilton Head. So been down here all week with my wife's family and just enjoying the time here. Got to play golf twice so far and going to lunch here in a little bit. Going to have some seafood for lunch, I'm sure, at one of our favorite places, the Skull Creek Boathouse on the north side of the island. And life has been good to me so far this week, so can't argue. And excited to get back up to Columbus. I missed the 2 one-day camps this week, but looks like between the 2 camps, they offered like 18 new players or something out of the 2 days or something ridiculous. So you get a scholarship offer and you get a scholarship offer and you get a scholarship offer. So we'll see how that all comes out on the back end. But yeah, it's been a good week and desperately needed. Hadn't had a vacation since February of 2023. And, feeling a little bit better about life, I guess, at this point.
Well, I got to say, I left 5 weeks of vacation behind at my previous job. And now that I've taken this on, it's difficult to find time. So last week was really the first time I ever said, okay, I'm not doing anything. My daughter's in town. It was almost like kind of a vacation destination spot for her. So we treated it as such. And I did work in some emails and that sort of thing, but pretty much shut it down for 5 days for the first time since I took this on in 2020 full time. So I enjoy that. And yeah, it's been about 25 years since I was in that part of the country, Hilton Head, Myrtle Beach, doing that with the kids. So that's a good time.
Yeah, Hilton Head's crazy. I mean, it's been all built up and, it's very, I guess this week is kind of a sandwich week in between the Memorial Day week and next week, which is quote unquote the unofficial beginning of the summer vacation season. I think this is a week that is not that heavily traveled. So maybe next week is when, and for the next 6 or 8 weeks after that is when things get kind of hectic, I guess.
Well, Tony, we're talking to a lot of people right now out there that despite getting to know us for the last 6 years, care a whole lot less about us than they do about a bunch of 17-year-old football players. So what is the latest in regards to leans and targets and what's going on?
Well, yesterday was the last 2 days have been pretty interesting. I don't know all of the names that were offered because there were so many, and they just, it's kind of rapid fire. You get done with the camp, you get done with talking to the players, and you go and start to you grab lunch or whatever, or you go start working, and then you see all of these tweets from players about getting offered. I know we talked to a couple players after being offered. One being Jameer Brown, who's the first 2027 Ohio kid to get an offer. He's a receiver out of Huber Heights, Wayne, which has sent guys like Marcus Freeman and Braxton Miller to Ohio State. But a guy that is like 6 foot, 170 ish, something like that. And to be offered this early as a true freshman, or as just coming off of a freshman year as an Ohio kid by Brian Hartline is pretty telling, and holds the national record for the 60 meter for freshmen. So a speedy guy. Talked to him afterwards about, growing up an Ohio State fan, but also having a draw to Notre Dame because of Marcus Freeman. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. But it's covering these camps, and Steve can tell you as well, like there's so much going on, and you're trying to find stuff to watch that you're watching, because you don't necessarily know all of the names, and you'll have to figure out, okay, who is that guy? Some guys you just look at, okay, that is somebody. And that was Jakeem Stewart yesterday, the number 1 player in the 2026 class, defensive lineman out of Louisiana, who already holds an offer and could be, he's working to reclassify to 2025. He's not said he's going to do that yet, but the work is being put in to make that happen. And he's a guy that's like 6'6", 260, 270, and is just the guy that stands out amongst a crowd of standouts. So it was interesting to get a look at him. Tavian St. Clair was there again yesterday for a little bit, helping out, throwing it around. But there's a 2027 quarterback, Brady Edmonds, who was offered yesterday, and he's their first 2027 quarterback offer. He's from California, 6'5", 200, good looking, looks like a quarterback. And so now they're on to 2027s. They're still looking for their 2026 quarterback, and they're going to have a bunch on campus over the next couple of weeks of those as well at camp. So just all kinds of stuff going on. Carlos Loughlin out there coaching them all up, the running backs. I don't know that anybody from, they're pretty much, they've got their targets down in terms of running back. So I don't know that necessarily going to see too many of them camping per se, but their coaches, they're running around like crazy this time of year.
I think I know what Steve's going to say to answer this question, but besides going after the best players, the best talent, and then getting a feel for the fit for that particular athlete, of course, it's all humming on all cylinders. The recruiting's been great. It's always been great for a long, long time. But is there a direction that this class needs to go in regards to, bringing in 4 of the top 12 receivers in the country would be great once again. But in terms of, do we need to pinpoint what is going to make this next class, the 2025 class, a success?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I think, obviously they recruit the heck out of the skill positions with the quarterback, the wide receivers, and the running backs that they typically land. And I know we're going to talk a little bit here in a moment about Bo Jackson, the guy they just got out of Cleveland Villa Angela St. Joseph's in the 2025 class. They just recruit the heck out of these skill positions, but football games are won up front. And let's never mistake that the bigger, stronger team, faster, stronger, bigger team is going to win 9 times out of 10. And that's usually been Ohio State. It hasn't been in some instances recently, particularly with the offensive line. So I think any 4 or 5-star offensive lineman, any 4 or 5-star defensive lineman that you can add would be great. When you look at the 5 starters on offensive line and 4 starters on defensive line, you may only have 2 of those 9 back on the team in 2025. So you really need to replenish your depth, I think, at both those positions. But more importantly, you need to replenish your quality at those positions, and all potential future all Big Ten players and all Americans at those positions. And that's what the litmus test to me is with this class. They have running backs and wide receivers and quarterbacks. Although running back depth is a little bit shy right now because Dallin Hayden left, and that may be one reason why Bo Jackson was so quick, to commit to Ohio State, is that it's wide open for 2025. I mean, he legitimately could come in and start next year. To be very honest, I mean, unless something happens, he's going to be right in the mix, kind of like J.K. Dobbins was, and Travion Henderson, same thing to start right away. So to me, I look at it that they definitely need help on the offensive and defensive lines, and quality help. And that to me is where they really need to do some heavy lifting between now and December, is what it would seem to me.
Tony, based on what you've seen thus far, is there hope in that direction, or whatever else you wanted to chime in with there?
Well, I agree. They're kind of thin right now on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Carter Lowe's the only offensive line commit, and as it was mentioned in the chat, you had they lost a line, didn't lose a lineman. Nolan Davenport from Massillon, a tackle, 3-star tackle, committed to Wisconsin this weekend. Doesn't have an Ohio State offer, but was like the number 2 guy in state on the offensive line. And I think they also had at camp this week, they had Jermeel Atkins from Trotwood, who's a like top 1,000 guy, but is like 6'8", 290, and they wanted to get a look at. But they need to start closing on this offensive line, and they're always in on some of the nation's top, but they can't. It's really been difficult for them to close on the offensive line. So Justin Fry's got to get some guys going, and defensive line. What do they have? 2 guys committed right now on the defensive line, and Zahir Mathis and London Merritt. They need more than that. And, Jakeem Stewart could eventually perhaps be one of those guys. Like I said, he's a 2026 and he's from Louisiana. So he's got a lot, it's going to be really tough to get him out of the South, but he keeps coming up to Ohio State for a reason on his own dime. And so that's going to be one to watch. But yeah, you get you win up front. I still think I'm wondering about this receiver class this year. They've got one guy committed into Z Jones, but I don't know how well they're going to do landing, trying to get all of their other guys. I know they're on a bunch of the top guys, as they always are. And Decorian Moore had a fantastic visit, and it's the top of their visits, and everything's going to be compared to that. But there are other visits coming, and I think the Texas visit is like this weekend, and people have viewed this as an Ohio State-Texas battle. And as I've said, if they're even right now before the Texas visit, that's not a great thing for Ohio State in that position, but certainly a guy that they would love to have. Bo Jackson, we can move on to him if you guys want. And this is a guy that Ryan Day has targeted. This has been kind of his personal, let's go get this guy, running back. He camped last year at Ohio State. He's always been one of the top guys wherever, and he's big, he's fast. There was some current concern about Georgia getting in there after that official visit, but Carlos Loughlin did a good job, and Ryan Day did a fantastic job in not letting him leave the state, because they've got this wide net that Carlos Loughlin has put out there after coming in, and there are only a handful of guys offered. He came in and double or tripled that number of offers as they're looking for guys who are good enough to be Buckeyes, and they're convinced there are more guys out there than Tony Alford was going after. And so you cast a wider net, and that way you kind of not left holding the bag when your 6 targets all go elsewhere. And getting Bo Jackson in right now is huge, because now they can begin to focus on the second guy and perhaps a 3 guy as they try to make this a 3 running back class if possible, because they want 5 scholarship running backs on the roster. And after this year, they're probably going to have 2. So if you want to get to 5, it's going to take 3 in this class or 2 in the class and a guy out of the portal. And I honestly think a guy out of the portal is going to look at this class or look at the running back room at Ohio State and see an opportunity to start from day one. So it'll be interesting to see how they proceed.
I'll throw in my 2 cents as my next bug me on Bo Jackson. Again, Cleveland St. Joe's, and we saw him at maybe an Under Armour camp the year before, and he's like straight out of central casting when you talk about a running back prospect. I mean, he is built, chiseled, looks phenomenal in that 6', 210 range. 24/7 Sports has him number 85 overall in the country, and number 3 running back, number 5 overall in Ohio. for 2025. Had offers from over 20 schools: Alabama, Auburn, all the Big Ten, Ohio State, Florida. So many top schools that he was looking at. And I just think, as we kind of related it, I mean, you look at the running back situation, Travion Henderson will be gone after the upcoming season. There's a very good chance Quinshon Judkins will be gone and going to the NFL after the upcoming season. And then that just leaves the two freshmen that came in this past year, Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon, among scholarship players, due back for 2025. So the opportunity is there for Bo Jackson. He is, one of the best really offensive skill players, in the Midwest. And as we said, he can get the ball in the open field with his cutting and his vision and everything else, and kind of weave his way through traffic. And then, he finds that pocket and he can hit it. So that's what's been impressive to me. He had over 1,700 yards rushing, averaged over 10 yards a carry. I mean, why would you do anything other than hand this guy the ball when he's going to get you over 10 yards a carry, 30 touchdowns this past year as a junior? And I just think it's the little things I think that he's got to continue to work and build on to be a running back at the next level, maybe blocking and all these other things that kind of go with just being an outstanding ball carrier. So to me, I think he's coming to Ohio State at the right time and fits a definite need, in this class. Getting back on the topic of recruiting overall, these 3 or 4 weeks right here with official visits and the summer camps are probably more geared for the 2026 and 2027 players to get them their first entree in front of the coaching staff and to get them offered. What these next 3 or 4 weeks, though, really are about for 2025 is getting top prospects on campus for official visits. And they're going to have like 25 or 30 players over this 4-week period on campus for visits. And this is a crazy stat. Nearly 15 of these players are national top 100 players out of this stretch of visits. And so they have targeted the best players in the country. They have scheduled official visits with them. We'll see if they get them on campus. This weekend, a cornerback, Fahim Delane out of Maryland, is coming in. Quincy Porter, wide receiver from New Jersey. They're both in the top 100, and they're coming on campus. I know also a defensive end, Damian Shanklin from Indiana. He's number 48. He'll be coming in. Jackson Lloyd, an offensive lineman from California. He's just outside the top 100. Tony referenced DeCorian Moore, him being on campus here this past weekend, and he's the number 5 player overall in the country from Texas, and he's coming in. And then in the weeks to come, so many more top players. I mean, you look at the weekend of June 14th, they'll have Josh Petty, a big-time offensive lineman from Georgia. He's number 13 overall. Linebacker Nathaniel Owusa-Boateng from IMG Academy in Florida. He's coming in the 14th. He's number 70 prospect overall. Midweek visit with a USC commitment. Defensive end Isaiah Gibson, number 17 overall, June 18th. He's coming in. And then finally wrapping it up, the weekend of June 21st, they're going to have a lot of their commitments on campus with Devin Sanchez, Naheem Offord, who did take a visit, I guess, recently to Auburn, and, of course, Tavian St. Clair, the quarterback that Tony referenced from Bell Fountain. He'll be at the Elite 11 coming up maybe in the next week or so. So those guys will be on campus, and they're going to be there to try and land the commitment from North Carolina offensive tackle David Sanders Jr., the number 3 overall player in the country, coming from Charlotte. They have commitments from number 2, Tavian St. Clair, number 4, Devin Sanchez, number 6, Naheem Offord. And as I mentioned a moment ago, they're trying to get, as I just said, David Sanders, who's number 3. And this weekend, I had him here. What did I do with him? another top 10 guy. Oh, well, St. Clair's number 2. I had one more top 10 guy on this list, and I can't find him. So they're looking at 5 of the top 10 visiting in the course of this month. So, they're going after the very best of the very best, is what it looks like to me.
The Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. When you shop on Amazon, please use our links. Same shopping experience, doesn't cost you a penny. Appreciate everyone being here. Leave those comments and questions. We will get to those. Any super chat contributions are much appreciated. We will pass on your recruiting and other questions to Tony, Steve, and if I would like to chime in myself. All right. I'm going to ask an offensive line question before we move on to the news of the week. And that's Seth McLaughlin was the only veteran addition to this offensive line, correct?
Yes.
Do we have a reasonable expectation that they're going to be better on the offensive front?
Well, I think the hope is that guys like Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer will be improved by the fact that they've had 1 year of experience under their belt. So you hope that it'll be better. The Missouri game, with having quarterbacks who had never played, was obviously a kind of an outlier because you didn't have to play them straight. You weren't really worried that they were going to complete a bunch of passes downfield and tear you up throwing the football. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. But so they got to play better. I mean, you got to be more consistent in the run game. Got to be able to protect the passer better. They just have to be better. And I think that the thought is that with Chip Kelly, maybe, devising some things to negate pass rushes, mixing some things up, using any defense's aggression against them in whatever ways you can. I think they're going to be able to negate a lot of that, and the offensive line the offense as a whole is going to perform much better. So that seems to be the hope. I think, again, you take Matthew Jones out of there, who was like a 4-year starter at guard, and he was a solid enough guy, but, he was an undrafted NFL free agent. So, I don't think, anybody was looking at him as being, a total difference maker up front. Depends how you want to play it. If you're going to go with Fryer at right tackle and then either Luke Montgomery, Tegra Toshbola, or Shabola, people continue to hound me on that. It's Shabola, I guess. And then Carson Hinsman, perhaps one of those guys as the right guard. That could be how you go, or maybe Shabola plays right tackle and somebody else plays guard. I don't know, but to me, I think it can't help but be better just because those guys all have a year of experience. Hinsman, Simmons, Fryer all have a year of experience under their belt. And it can only, as Howard Jones sang a million years ago, things can only get better. So there you go.
I would honestly like to know if all of this concern about Ohio State's line was there before the Cotton Bowl or if it really ramped up after the Cotton Bowl, because I don't remember it being such a panic piece before the Cotton Bowl. But anytime I tweet about or write about or whatever about the Buckeyes, somebody's going to be like, well, they better do something about that offensive line. Or, hey, Quinshon Judkins is transferring to Ohio State. Are they going to get an offensive line? And judging the Cotton Bowl offensive line is like judging theater based on getting shot in the back of the head. That this, if you want Abraham Lincoln to be your theater reviewer, like some of the plays are going to be pretty good. Didn't very much care for My American Cousin, I'll be honest with you. And that's really what the Cotton Bowl was, figuratively, for the Buckeyes, because you didn't have your normal center in there. Matt Jones slides over. He's not able to make the same kind of calls because he doesn't play the position. And then we all saw Enoch Vamahi in there at right guard, and it did not go well. And it did not go well for Enoch Vamahi the year before when he had to step in and play against Michigan, and he was replaced pretty quickly. So you were at you had a disadvantage on the offensive line with two guys that were out of position. And then also, as Steve said, you've got a true freshman quarterback that the Missouri defense does not have to respect. So they were at a complete disadvantage with that offensive line. That is not an example of what the Ohio State offensive line was before that game or what it will be after that game. So you're returning 2 first-team All Big Ten offensive linemen in Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer. You're adding a starting center from Alabama, and I know what people will say about Seth McLaughlin, but he was a 2-year starter. Nick Saban did not want him to leave. Alabama did not want him to leave. You've got Josh Simmons is a year older. This is his 3rd year of starting. He got better and better as the season went on. So the expectations are that he's going to be fine. So basically, you're replacing one starter on the offensive line in Matt Jones, and you may be doing it with last year's starting center or somebody who's better than him. So they're in a much better position than they were at this time a year ago. And I think they're in a better position than they were at this time in November, even because, as Steve said, Matt Jones, this was his 6th year, played forever, tried to play forever, and really does not progress into the NFL. And, will maybe be in a camp, but did not get drafted. So I think you're looking at a better offensive line, a year older offensive line, a veteran offensive line. And honestly, I may be one of the few, but I don't have any concerns about the offensive line. My concerns about this Ohio State team are more about the linebackers than the offensive line, or the tight ends than the offensive line.
What's interesting to me, I could dovetail this into some discussion about the Athlon's preseason magazine, which came out recently. Lindy's and Athlon's are both now on the newsstand. And believe me, they are both just packed full of great information. If you're a fan, they're both worth picking up. Both quality products, in my opinion. They do their position unit rankings, and I'm going through and I'm looking at it, and they have their national rankings, and they have Ohio State's offensive line as the number 10 offensive line in the country. And it just kind of tells you that everything is relative. Was it best in class last year? Certainly not. Is it predicted to be best in class this year? No, not necessarily, but they're in the top 8%, out of 135 teams. They're projected as a top 10 offensive line, and number 4 in the Big Ten. And number 4 in the Big Ten out of the 7 or 8 different position groups is the worst of any Ohio State position group. The rest of them across the board are either number 1 or number 2 in the Big Ten. And certainly in the top 10 nationally at every other I think they're in the top 10 in every position group, obviously. So, this team is stacked side to side, top to bottom. And I think that kind of speaks to their strategy with the transfer portal, that they've got, by my count, at least 2, maybe 3 scholarships that are open. And they haven't dived in there, just taking bodies, give me a warm body, to fill this spot. They have not done that, as we've seen them do in the past with some guys. I guess this backup safety they took, where was he from? NC State or somewhere, or I don't know, recently, might fit that bill because he doesn't figure to play. He doesn't figure to be a starter. I mean, he's there as kind of an insurance policy, I suppose, if Lathan Ransom isn't 100% perhaps. But, that was very telling to me that, we kind of wring our hands about this, but nationally, I don't know if it's by default or osmosis or what, but they are, considered a top 10 offensive line. So, okay. Now they got to go out and play like it. That's the thing. And I do believe in the idea that, that there will be improvement for some of these guys from their first year to their second year as starters. I do believe, because that's something that's been consistent over time. Even if they're not the most talented, at least that experience has got to be worth something. So, Orlando Pace isn't walking through that door apparently, and we'll see if the guys they throw out there are up to the challenge, I guess. And I can get into some Athlons too if you want, but that was something that was telling to me.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in with Lindy's has them the number 6 offensive line in the country and the number 1 offensive line in the Big Ten. And you're looking at a group of guys where Seth McLaughlin has, I think, 22 career starts. Carson Hinsman has 12 career starts. Josh Simmons has 26 career starts. Donovan Jackson has 26 career starts. Josh Fryer has 14 career starts. So that's nearly 90 career starts, almost 100 career starts for that group. So the experience is there, and now you just need to build that consistency. And then also not just – it's great that you've got 5, but you need a backup tackle, you need a backup guard, you need a backup center. And the good thing about having a backup center is your backup center is, has starting experience. It's going to be Carson Hinsman or it's Seth McLaughlin is the backup. And then they've got if you can't find a right guard and you're Ohio State, then stop playing football, basically. You
Call the president.
Yes.
We're going to surrender our position in Cuba.
90% of your offensive line is guards in terms of your offensive line room, because you don't have a lot of tackles. You've got a bunch of guards. You should be able to find one. And I think whether it's Tigger Shabola, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, I think they're going to be okay. And it's Carson Hinsman started there in the spring game after Luke Montgomery went with the ones for the majority of camp. So we'll see what happens in fall camp. And in terms of the roster, we talked with Ryan Day at an event on Tuesday, and he said the roster is set now, so they're not expecting to add anybody else. And really, there's nobody out there to add that would be Ohio State caliber that they'd be comfortable using a roster spot on next year.
Steve, before we move on, if you've got some other musings after checking out Athlon, certainly fire.
What's interesting is their top 10 is very similar to Lindy's top 10. Just as you get into it, some teams are transposed. Ohio State, Georgia's number 1, Ohio State 2, Oregon 3, whereas I think Lindy's had Texas 3. Well, they're transposed at 3 and 4. Both of them had Ole Miss at 5. Then I think Lindy's had Michigan 6, Alabama 7. This magazine has Alabama 6, Michigan 7. Penn State was, I think, 11 in Lindy's, and they've got them in here at 8. Notre Dame 9, Missouri 10. No other Ohio State opponent besides Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State, which that's 3 of the top 8 if you're scoring at home, is in the top 25. And USC is at number 22. They're the only other Big Ten team that's listed. And then outside the top 25, obviously Iowa is right there, et cetera, so on. But, as I go down, what am I looking at? As I go down and look at it, they are very bullish on Ohio State in terms of individual players. They have a flock of them on their All-American team. They have, whereas Lindy's had Quinshon Judkins, I think, on the first team All-American, Athlon's has Travion Henderson on the first team, and he's on there with Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver, Donovan Jackson offensive line, Denzel Burke at corner, and JT Tuimoloau, 5 first-team players. And then you have Judkins on the second team with Jack Sawyer, the defensive end, and Tyleek Williams is on the third team. So a flock, almost half the starting lineup is considered an All-American, either first, second, or third team. Conspicuous by his absence, as our friend Vince McMahon used to say, is Caleb Downs. He was not listed on any of the 3 All-American teams. He was on the All Big Ten first team for this magazine. So, yeah, that was it. Ohio State's running backs, defensive line, and secondary are all considered number one position groups in the country. They are number two at wide receiver, third at quarterback, which it really is a good group of quarterbacks, and seventh at linebacker. So that'll give you the idea. And as we talked about, 10th on the offensive line. All of the position groups considered in the national top 10.
My evaluation of Athlon, Street and Smith, Lindy's, all those magazines, not to group them all together, but I'm grouping them all together because obviously they're different entities, but it's kind of difficult to distinguish, looking back over 40 years. But they're great for information. They are great for information. But if I'm looking to see who's got a crystal ball, I don't know who I go to. I guess I go to myself, and I'm not saying I've got the crystal ball. I don't know that anyone has the crystal ball because, Steve, you just ran it down. The top 11 or 12 teams in the country are basically, off by 1 or 2 spots. So they pretty much just fall in line with each other in regards to their projections. And we all know that somewhere from 7 to 10 of the top 25 teams in the country to start the season are not going to finish in the top 25 in the country. And what has been my observation, and I have yet to look at these magazines yet, has been you can take last year's standings and you can take this year's predictions, and they're typically off by like 1 game, unless there's a Colorado outlier where you see, okay, this team's going to be much different this year. Other than that, they're pretty much taking last year, and then they're figuring, okay, Ohio State's supposed to be better. Of course, Michigan's going to fall off a little bit. Oregon's coming to the league. And I guess maybe I'm expecting a little bit too much visionary out of them. And they're basically replicating, and from a prediction standpoint, tweaking what happened last season. And that's not college football. That may be college football in the top 4 or 5, but for the rest of it, it's not, because my own made up favorite statistic is how many teams change by at least 3 games in the standings from one year to another. And it's roughly a third of the sport in the Power 5. From year to year.
Go ahead, Tony, and I have a take on that as well.
Well, and I think one of the other factors in that formula is, do you have your starting quarterback back? And if you do, you kind of get bumped up a little as well. That's like the number one factor. Do you have your starting quarterback back? Is your head coach back? And
move forward 2 spots.
That's pretty much it. Collect $200 and, go to Park Place. But go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, my take on it is, looking at that top 10, I mean, the Big Ten portion of it is all going to play each other, and the SEC portion of it is all going to play each other, give or take. I mean, there's some that won't play each other, but potentially in the championship game, they could play each other, whatever. And what's going to happen is, I'll just throw this team out there. Michigan is probably going to lose 3 or 4 games because they're playing teams that, are, quote unquote, as good or better than them. And I don't see them winning any of those games, in my opinion. But so I think the phenomenon, and we're going to have to come up with a term for it, is, okay, it's going to be like it is a lot of years. There's going to be 1 or 2 Big Ten teams at the end of the year with 1 loss or no losses. There's going to be 1, 2, 3 SEC teams at the end of the year with 1 loss or no losses, or, whatever. And everybody else is going to be in that 2-loss, 3-loss group. And what do? Do you rate an SEC team with 2 or 3 losses ahead of an ACC or Big 12 team that has 0 or 1 losses? And I think what's going to happen is, over each progressive year, as we move further into this Big 2 and Little 8, conference setup that we're going into, there's going to be less credence given to ACC and Big 12 teams. I think this year they'll still get the benefit of the doubt that, okay, if Texas Tech, just for lack of a better team, or North Carolina, for lack of a better team, were to pop off in a 12-1 or 13-0, certainly they deserve whatever they get. But 11-2, 12-1, are you going to rank an 11-2 North Carolina ahead of a 9-3 Ole Miss? Something like that, or 10-2, 9-3. This year, you may still get away with doing that. In the future, the Reese Davises and the people who are paid to promote the SEC are not going to abide that. They're going to say, "Oh, they didn't play an SEC schedule. There's no way," So, or Big Ten schedule. That's kind of how they'll look at it. You didn't play an SEC schedule, or a Big Ten schedule. You played an ACC schedule or you played a Big 12 schedule. So you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt in years going forward because you're not one of the top two leagues. But this year, it'll be interesting to see how it all meshes together. If a team at the end of the year in the Big 12 goes 11-2, loses the championship game, do they even still get in the playoff? This year, maybe. Future year, Big 12 loser, 11-2, you're going to be down there 11, 12, 13, fighting like hell, going on any talk show you can to say, but, we played Ole Miss close in our one big non-conference game. We lost to them by 3. That's what the message will be.
Sounds like we're preaching, or I guess singing from the same hymnal, but I know hardly nobody knows what a hymnal is.
Oh, well, we're the haves.
But anyway, because basically what it is.
Screw the have-nots. We're the haves.
Because I think the committee's going to try to, or at least, of course, they're going to preach to us that they're taking it as is. They're taking the results as is. Now, we'll see what the non-conference games tell us. If the ACC and the Big 12 can step up and win big non-conference games, but I don't know that they have that many opportunities to do so. Can't think of the Big 12 teams playing that difficult of non-conference games to be able to prove themselves off the top of my head. But I think there's no question the SEC and the Big 10 teams are going to be given the benefit of the doubt with same record. But in terms of what you're telling us, Steve, when you're matching up lesser records in the SEC and the Big 10, I completely agree with you. As this plays out year after year after year, and if we get the expected results and the narrative and the expected results, especially at the top in the Final Four in the championship games, where there probably be no Big 12 and or ACC teams, that is just going to continue to stir the narrative is going to be backed up, I believe, by the results on the field, and it's all going to be one big cycle and snowball downhill. And you're going to have to finish first in the ACC or the Big 12, or a strong second. Oklahoma State at 9-4 from last year after losing the Big 12 championship game by 4 touchdowns is not going to cut it.
Well, I know in the Lindy's magazine, they only have one ACC team and one Big 12 team making the playoffs. I don't know what the Athlon magazine has, but 5 SEC teams, 3 Big 10 teams.
I got it.
Notre Dame and Liberty, or whatever, and then ACC and the Big 12.
Athlon, the buys are Georgia, Ohio State. They have Florida State number 3 winning the ACC, and Utah number 4 winning the Big 12. Then they have Oregon from the Big 10 at number 5 going against Liberty, the Conference USA champion, at number 12 in the group of 5 entrant.
We just saw that last year.
Number 11. Yeah, and it didn't go. I don't think it went very well for Liberty, did it? And then number 11, Notre Dame against number 6, Texas. So Notre Dame is not an SEC or Big 10 team, but they're Notre Dame. Penn State versus Ole Miss, that's SEC and Big 10. And then Michigan, number 9 at number 8, Alabama, that's SEC Big 10. So, one each from the ACC and the Big 12, plus Notre Dame and Liberty, and the rest are SEC and Big 10. It's kind of crazy.
I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens when, say, you have 3 Big 10 teams that finish the regular season with 2 losses, or 1 loss, and then only 2 of those teams can go into play for the conference title. What happens in the committee's eyes when the losing team of the Big Ten championship game drops below what was the third place team in the rankings. Like, does that loss hurt you? Does that loss move the other team that wasn't in the championship game ahead of you? Should it? I don't think it should, since you've already made it past them, but it's going to be fascinating to see. And is somebody going to be left out of the playoffs
and maybe
because
beat
they
them head
lost?
to head? Maybe
Yeah,
even
well,
beat them head to head too.
So
Yeah.
there's gonna be situations where they have to take a team with a worse record, you
Yeah.
would think,
Yes.
because of the regular season.
Yep. Yep. It's probably going to happen. And of course, if you have a marquee non-conference win or a better, let's say that the first team in your scenario went out of conference and beat Texas, and the second one went out of conference and beat Wake Forest. Well, that Texas win's got to stand up for something. So I think that computes part of the overall picture too. Every team, they talk about in the NCAA tournament, are they really going to take 8 ACC teams this year? Whatever the number is, whatever conference it is, or 9 Big East teams, when they went to that bloated Big East that had like 16 teams in it, are they really going to take 11 of them? Whatever. It's like, it isn't like that. And the Big East found that out the hard way this year in the NCAA tournament, because they had some really good teams like Seton Hall and maybe St. John's at the end deserved it, and they didn't get in. And, it's because you look at each team's resume irrespective of anybody else, and then you vote on, this is the order of these teams. That's how they do it. And, you're not looking to reward one conference, just because of the overall largesse of that conference is the best, or, for 20 years they've dominated. It's got to be resume by resume by resume as best as you can, because it's apples to oranges in most cases, especially in football when you don't play. There's no common opponents for a lot of these teams you're trying to compare. I mean, how do you do it? It's very difficult at times.
To Tony's point, if you take the 10 years of the college football playoff 4-team format and take those college football playoff committee rankings and you look at them prior to the conference championship game, you've got a slew of teams that were safely in the 12-team field had there been one. Then they lose the conference championship game. They drop to 10-3, and they drop lower than 12th in the country. Now, the committee at that time was just looking at just ranking teams after number 5. You don't know if they're going to take that more seriously in regards to, okay, do we truly drop that team? What was their performance in the conference championship game? Did they lose to Ohio State 31-28? Or did they pull a 2014 Wisconsin and get completely annihilated? So a loss is not necessarily a loss.
Yeah, and when Florida State, like last year, had an opportunity to do what Ohio State did against Wisconsin to prove themselves, and they weren't able to do that with a backup quarterback. So what you do in these particular games, like all games are created differently, and the outcomes all carry their own significant kinds of weight, because if Ohio State loses 2 games, like loses to their top 2 opponents, they don't have the non-conference to lift them up over that. And Michigan could lose 2 conference games but beat Texas, and that forgives essentially both of those losses against somebody else that they're competing for a spot in. So certainly not all losses are created equally. And when Ohio State has the non-conference schedule that they do, you better not trip up, because it's going to be really hard for you to make it up.
Now, unless I misread this, the FPI has Ohio State with a tougher schedule than Michigan by 1 spot. That's what I saw. I saw it's 17 versus 18 in the country. Now, I just pulled up the FPI, but they don't have the schedule rankings on the FPI. But I read that in an article, and I thought, okay, well, of course, we know that Texas is on Michigan's schedule, and Ohio State has no one.
Yeah,
but
must be weighted in one way or the other to really give you a lot of credit for playing top 10 teams or whatever is the only thing I can think of.
Because if you look at like the teams that are ranked or could be ranked, Ohio State has Iowa, Oregon. Do you want to throw Nebraska in there? And Penn State and Michigan. Michigan would have Texas, Do you want to throw USC in there? Do you want to throw Washington in there? And then Oregon and Ohio State. So I don't know. That's certainly makes you go, that sort of thing when you consider the non-conference situation and the fact that Ohio State never has to play Ohio State, which automatically makes their schedule easier than somebody who does have to play them, like Michigan.
Washington, I don't think gives them any credit at all. Just the complete. I mean, they're going to be lucky to go 6-6, doesn't it sound like? I mean, with the mass exodus. So, if they factored that in and the relative worth of Washington, Iowa and Nebraska would certainly be ahead of them. But again, we're now we're down in the 20s and 30s trying to split hairs, and it just. It's a big who cares to me. I mean, I don't see where this means much. At this point, I think it's all you can do to put together a coherent top 10, in my opinion, and then try and I don't know. I think something has to be said when you take the field to play a top 10 team. You could lose that game. I mean, you could win by 2 touchdowns or you could lose by 2 touchdowns, home or away. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, different things have happened. I mean, that big Georgia-Tennessee game a year or two ago was such a big freaking deal. And didn't Georgia go in there and just run rule them or something? I mean, it's like, I don't know. You're at peril. When you're playing a top 10 team, your place or their place, you're in peril. And so I think when you look at, 1/4 of your schedule are games that, could go either way. I mean, realistically could go either way. I think that's what makes Ohio State's schedule a little bit more difficult. I mean, Michigan has, theoretically a 75 to 80% chance to win 8 of its games, theoretically. I think the other 4 are probably more in the 40 to 60 range, but,
Well, I've got to think that this FPI, and I've seen other metrics and services that have Oregon a smidge ahead of Ohio State, and that's simply based on that game being played in Eugene, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I do also recall Ryan Day's first team in 2019 having, I believe, a 6% chance of winning the Big Ten, according to the FPI, because they had a new quarterback and a new coach. And so there are just slight fallacies in the system.
He looked like dog crap in the spring game, and then came out, and really didn't play well against Minnesota, and then got hurt. And then after that, like the light bulb went on for him, and he was fabulous after that. But yeah.
Well, the problem with the computer stuff is early in the season, all of the data is not. It's pretty flawed. It's based on, it's not based on what has happened yet this year. It's based on what has happened last year and people coming back. So it gets more fine tuned as the season goes on when there's actual data to feed it.
Talking about being fine-tuned, Ohio State's academic standing right now. Harvard, Ohio State, right? Both number 1 APR. We had Bill Bender from Sporting News on, and he was talking about his have and have not model of if there's a 40-team cut, and he instituted a academic component that most people would scoff at, but Ohio State showing up with a fine APR number, number 1 in the country, which for somebody who's unfamiliar, it's just basically progress toward graduation rate.
Yeah, and I think that's tremendously indicative. I think of the investment, that Gene Smith and everybody has made into academic support for these players at Ohio State is second to none, and they have the Success Center, and that's been online for about 15 or 20 years now, and different resources. They have everything at their disposal to succeed academically, and they are making sure that nobody falls between the cracks. And so that is Ryan Day, I think, one of his legacies. He's graduating his players. And I know in this day and age, when all anybody cares about is being in the playoff and winning the playoff and beating Michigan and whatever else, there are still some people somewhere who think it is pretty good that, whatever the mission is, that should be part of it, graduating your players and making sure that people succeed at the game of life. And I think that there's still something to be said for that. And even in this transient time where guys are, leaving and coming on board, even the guys who left are leaving on good terms academically. And that is important in terms of that APR ranking as well. It says they had no black marks against them at all, is what it says to me. So just tremendously impressive. They're going to have a lot of guys playing with degrees this fall with so many guys that came back, maybe a record number of guys with degrees this year. I don't know, but it is very telling of what the program is all about. And again, this is something that you hold up and you show the moms and dads of these prospects and say, look, we will stand behind your son. We will support them. We will make sure they cross the finish line, because we've done it with all these other guys this last 5 or 10 years, as our number one ranking in the country will illustrate.
Well,
there's nobody better at this than what we're doing.
Yeah. Steve, I mentioned this on the radio here earlier in the week about how, 30 years ago, you're wondering, boy, I hope this guy can be eligible. I hope this guy can pass his classes, and, he's starting linebacker or starting safety or this top prospect can be eligible. You don't have those concerns. When was the last time, when was the last time there were even rumors of somebody being ineligible? And boy, this guy's going to have to take some summer classes and summer courses to be able to be on the field for the Buckeyes. It doesn't happen anymore. And they have so many resources, as Steve said, and to make the grade. And they're not alone. You've Penn State and Michigan have all of these places. If you've invested so much, you've got to spend all of this money somewhere. So why not put some of it into academics? Now, I do wonder, will the academics start to suffer now that you have to put the money into the players themselves? And what else starts to suffer? The buildings, the nutrition, whatever, because or the coaching salaries, perhaps, crazy thought, or the number of staff on your coaching staff, where the money's going to have to go to the players, so it's got to come from somewhere else.
There were about 80 players and coaches nominated for the College Football Hall of Fame, or were placed on the final list of candidates, I should say, for the College Football Hall of Fame, including Urban Meyer and James Laurinaitis. I got to think, slam dunk, rubber stamp it, move it forward for those two.
I think Laurinaitis has been on it a couple of years now, but I mean, Chris Spielman didn't get inducted until 2009. So and he's got to wait
years after Pat Fitzgerald got in, who played 10 years after him.
Mm-hmm.
Go explain that to somebody.
But I'm with you. Laurinaitis, 3-time All-American, Nagurski winner, Butkus winner. He'll eventually get in,
whether it's this year or not. Yeah.
I'd like to see him make Nick Saban wait. Just because it's the whole Ted Williams thing or whatever. It's the baseball voters. Nobody gets to go in on the first ballot.
All right. Yes. Urban Meyer, 187-32. So much better record than Nick Saban.
I'm going to put on my list for Ross. Yeah. Put it on my list for Ross Bjork. He's got to get that sign up there for Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel. If Paul Brown and Woody Hayes have them, then those two Pikers deserve it as well.
I believe so. Tony, what's going on at Buckeye Huddle and, of course, the Buckeye Weekly podcast?
Buckeye Weekly, we were just streaming at 10 o'clock this morning to talk about camp and the stuff that we saw at camp. So that'll be an audio edition of that will be coming out later this afternoon. Writing, talking with some of these prospects, writing stories on that, and also continuing my series of previewing the upcoming season through various top matchups for the Buckeyes individually and predictions and things of that nature, where, some various things that I'm writing about that you can find at buckeyehuddle.com to pass your time.
Steve, I'm thinking at this point, Bucknuts doesn't even exist in your world.
Well,
for at least a few
I'm
days.
enjoying the work of Bill Kurlick and Patrick Murphy from afar as they cover the camp. I'm like Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop after. Is this the man who wrecked the buffet at the Harrow Club? And they ask him what he's doing there, and he says, "I'm on vacation." So, that's me. I keep saying it all week. I'm on vacation. So there you go.
Nice.
But
Well,
we'll be
we
back at
appreciate
it
you
next
making
week.
time.
We're gonna hit the ground running. So we'll have 2 more camps, I think, next week, and then I'm going to miss maybe the 5th camp and the 7-on-7. Although St. Clair won't be at the 7-on-7 this year because he's got Elite 11 then, I think. So no reason to go to the 7-on-7. So for me. So.
All right, Buckeyes fans, we will be back next week, but that's the key term. We will be here. We're here every week. We just don't know when. So please subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, and don't look over your shoulder. The Michigan channel is gaining on you fast. So if you watch, but you don't subscribe, you should subscribe just for another way to say Ohio State's better than Michigan. There you go.
There you go.
For Tony, for Steve, appreciate you being here. We'll see y'all next week.